Welcome to the Devil's Advocates, where we usually make it our mission to disagree with Rotten Tomatoes.
Last night we went to a movie theater and sat with an audience in front of a big screen at the IFC Center to see Roma, Alfonso Cuarón's new self-DP'd, starring no one famous that you've ever heard of, at least not in America, Spanish language, Mexican personal biopic movie that is getting showered with praise. It won Berlin Film Festival, not Berlin, it won Venice rather.
Venice, yeah.
Won the Golden Lion at Venice. It's Mexico's submission for Best Foreign for the Oscars this year, has a very good chance of winning. Everyone loves it. Cinematography, sound design. Everyone says you got to see it in a theater, and yet Netflix put it in like a few theaters, and it's going to be coming out on streaming. It's going to expand a little bit more.
Yeah, I think
more
we have 50 theaters total.
Yeah, by the time we hit December 13th or whatever. Yeah. Anyway, we saw the damn thing, and let's talk about it. We could disagree with Rotten Tomatoes because it has a 99 or 98, but it feels somewhat reductive given the fact that we've done a lot of sort of disagree with Oscar movies lately, and this movie is so, I don't want to say slight, but there is so little, like, I don't know, what's that right adjective? Like, the movie is difficult to target for why you'd want to, like, hate it, because it doesn't set up that many things you can fail too spectacularly at.
A lot of
it's
times,
not a complex narrative.
There's that. A lot of times we talk about sort of the technical aspects that have to do with the expectations a movie sets up. Like, usually we say a movie's bad because it doesn't fulfill the expectations that it sets up before, and that creates discomfort, and then you don't think about the movie properly and all this other stuff. This movie is so cohesive in that way, it's really hard to look at it from any of those angles.
Plus, like, if we did an Advocates, it would just be like, it's slow, it's black and white, whatever, like, all sorts of stuff like that. Because the movies doesn't make any apologies for its pace and whatnot, and its artistic sort of eye and lens. Anyway, what could two white boys add to the conversation about Roma? Not much, except it's great. It's perfect. It's wonderful. Any shot in this movie, any given frame would be the best shot. Those gorgeous, breathtaking shot of any other movie in a given year, and yet somehow each one does it here. And then the best frames or the best shots, because there's a lot of really cool camera movement here, the best shots in this movie are just some of the best shots, I don't know, since Citizen Kane.
Here's what I want to say about the cinematography. It was a running joke in our apartment prior to this movie that people are not being very deep when they talk about the cinematography. They're just like, oh, it says everything, it says nothing. It's this weird discussion.
It's hard to articulate why it hurt, why it felt so much for them to just see a frame of a car getting into a driveway or whatever.
The fact of the matter is, I actually think it's pretty easy to articulate, at least for me. And for me, what worked is that it's not that any of the really, really cool looking shots were so amazing that I was blown away, although they were cool. It's that on the whole, the film just had a really strong, like, visual language. Like, after the first 10 minutes of watching, you get what the film is doing, how it's very consistent with the framing, with the distance to the subject, to the lens choice, the depth of field, all that stuff. It's very consistent, and that helps you get immersed in it. At a certain point, I stopped noticing edits. I stopped noticing the camera movements nearly as much. I sort of melted into it. Yes, every now and then I get drawn out by some crazy, really flex camera move, but for the most part, for large stretches, it's just like you kind of learn to read it the way, like when you read Shakespeare, you get used to his language and it just becomes a thing.
Well, he shoots it on Super 65 digital or whatever, the Alexa 65, and yet he somehow is able to grab deep focus out of such a huge sensor, which is extremely difficult. Like, you have to have, a wonderful lens choice and a shit ton of light, obviously. So he lights the hell out of this movie, clearly. And then beyond that, it creates sort of an effect that is very seldom seen, because we don't see that many movies that are shot with just a large sensor size, and we very rarely see them, like I said, with deep focus. And so when you marry that with the cinematography, when you marry that with the black and white, like, super high contrast, you get just like these beautiful canvas shots that are just like, again, what people say about the best version of cinematography when, like, already pretentious people talk about how it's like every frame is a painting, right? This movie, literally, it looks like a painting. The amount of depth that you get to each shot is just astounding. Like, every single image, the way the light bathes over these houses and these objects and these people, it's so tremendously engrossing and encapsulating, and not in a sort of flashy way. There's a lot of times when you see, like, the best movies of any given year during the movie, because the narrative is so striking, and so like well paced and fun, you know you're watching your favorite movie of the year right then and there. Like it happens with something like Whiplash. I remember like by that halfway point, you're like, this is the best thing I've seen all year. Or even Green Book, like which maybe we'll catch flack about because a lot of people have issues with that movie, but a lot of people love it. Green Book, like from the first act, I was like, this is one of the best movies I've watched all year. Like I could just tell I was into it. And Roma, it really, you don't have that moment, even with the spectacular, long, impressive, really dramatic sequences with crazy camera moves and intense, really, really emotional acting from the lead performer, who's a first-time actress here. Even all that stuff happens, you don't really have that moment where you're like, I can't believe how much fun I'm watching here, because it's not. It really is a mood piece, and I feel like that's why the cinematography is so intensely moving, because while you're impressed by each frame, you're not sitting there thinking about it necessarily. You are enjoying it, and then when you come away from the experience, between that and the sound design, which is also unbelievably stellar, you're like, oh man, I guess that was a lot. I really did get a lot out of that. It sticks with you the next day, which is something that the best movies of every year always do. I guess we should say what it's about. Can you just do a quick summary? It's not really like a plotty movie.
Sure. It's about Cleo. She is a maid who lives in the house of a wealthy doctor and his wife, and their many kids. Like what, 4 kids, 5 kids, a lot of kids. And that couple's going through some marital issues, and she kind of has some of her own relationship stuff, and it also takes place in the midst of larger political turmoil, a lot of protests and riots that take place in Mexico, and it kind of uses that as a metaphor for her getting through this period of her life. So like John said, more of a mood piece, not that plot-driven.
It's a lot about class differences in Mexico. Like it's a little bit of a history lesson, because how much do we know about 1970s Mexican villages that... like hearing Alfonso Cuarón talk about it, he talks about how apparently the family is supposed to be it's based on his family, like very directly, and his caretaker, who was the live-in not mate, servant is what the word they use, I guess. The live-in servant with them is that apparently like there was such strict, rigid classes in Mexico, and there's so much poverty that something like this family that was considered like a middle-class family, not a rich family, still had servants because there were so many poor people that needed jobs, especially this woman being an indigenous Mexican woman. That would make her even lower in the social class system. Right. It's very Cassavetes in some ways. Like there really are just like scenes of, like the character going out with her friends and this and that, and then, each scene doesn't necessarily move the plot forward in a dramatic way, but it adds to.
I also thought about Linklater a bit.
Yeah.
Like it felt like at times like it had like the epic scope of like a David Lean movie. It's like it's Dr. Zhivago. It's all this history happening, but at the same time, it's just told through like in Boyhood. It's just a kid moving through life. It's like it's this woman moving through this time in Mexico. Although the nice thing about the movie is it sort of showcases a sort of underrepresented perspective on that.
And a lot of people aren't talking about what like the overall conflict is, because it's sort of like a spoiler, and is very much better received if you don't expect what's going to happen. I'm not saying there's like a major twist, like there's no killer, or anything like that. But it certainly gets dramatic and hefty in a way that is adult and sophisticated and goes beyond just malazing through, looking out at the ocean and whatever. But we don't necessarily want to spoil it here, but rest assured it's really effective, and that's where all the emotion sort of rests on the shoulder of this actress who gives very award-worthy work, like really, really excellent. But I was going to say, what's really interesting about this movie is it retreads some of the themes of Alfonso Cuarón's last movie, Gravity, which is the polar opposite of this movie in some ways, but it's kind of funny to think that like it tells an intimate, somewhat tragic female story using space. That movie, Gravity, using like $100 million and space and 3D. Right. And this movie does like the same thing of telling like an intimate, female, somewhat tragic story that's personal, but it uses just Mexico and black and white. Like it's not only is it not in 3D, it's not even in color. Like, it's obviously a very technically advanced movie. It's shot with Alexa 65, but it is kind of ironic to see there's definitely some parallels between the last movie, which by the way, he won Best Director with, and let's see what happens this year.
Do it again.
It's amazing to think how many Mexican directors are winning Best Director. Not saying that he will, but if he does, in the last 6 years, we've had one Alfonso Cuarón, this could be 2 Alfonso Cuaróns, 2 Iñárritus, and a Guillermo del Toro, and then there's just a Damien Chazelle just in there in the middle, like, you know what I mean? Like, Mexican filmmakers, these guys are just, they're so good at directing. I don't know, man. Like, not to generalize. I know the 3 of them are all friends. I just listened to a podcast with them talking about it, so that's why. But like those guys are just like the most talented filmmakers in the world right now, and they're all like they all grew up in Mexico at the same time. Like they all know each other. I'm not saying they're friends as kids or anything like that. Them and Lubeski winning all the cinematography stuff, and he was supposed to shoot this movie, but then Alfonso Cuarón did the cinematography himself because he dropped out. But like if he did shoot this movie, you know, it would have looked just as good if not, you know, whatever. Like he keeps winning cinematography. There's just so much talent coming out of Mexico, and the culture is so rich, and there's so much racism in America. So it'll be really interesting to see how this movie gets received and it's spit out to millions of Netflix subscribers.
I hope it does better, because here's what the one thing I guess we do have to offer as two white guys talking about Roma, which is that going into Roma, I admit it felt a little bit like homework, you know, like when you're in school and like you're gonna read this book and like, I'd probably like this book, but it's weird if I have to do it.
There's subtitles.
And then just I really loved it, and it's like that book you sometimes read in school. Like, wait, I'm so glad that the teacher made me read this. This is now going to be one of my favorites, and I'll forget the fact that I was told to read it. I mean, no one told me to see this movie, but you know what I mean. So if you are a film buff and for whatever reason, I want to see Black Klansman again, I want to see Roma, just go see Roma or watch on Netflix if you can't get to a theater, because you're probably going to like it.
If you watch Roma on Netflix and you are not the fan of overly arty movies, but you feel like you have to check it out because it's going to get nominated for all these things, I just say, do yourself a favor, try your absolute best to carve out the full 2 hours to see it in one sitting, because I know with Netflix it's so easy to be like, I'll watch 15 minutes here or there. I really think the experience will not be the same if you watch it without. Forget the sound design, forget the cinematography, watch the damn movie in one sitting. That's the big difference between theaters and Netflix, in my opinion. And then beyond that, yes, if you can hook up your laptop to the TV or watch it on the Netflix app or whatever, try to watch on a bigger screen with better sound if you can. But like I said, my biggest word of advice is, especially if you're skeptical about am I going to have to watch this black and white Spanish-speaking movie just because everyone else says it's great, I'm going to roll my eyes at how arty it is, please at least try to watch it all at once. Roma's great. Thanks for watching. We're not saying anything new about it. So if you thought we were going to devil's advocate, haha.
Gotcha.